Hi, recovery friends. When I look around here now, I see Big Book Awakening people, Celebrate Recovery, that have done Celebrate Recovery with me, Upper Room, LifeLab, and AA, all sitting here, so that's pretty good. It's pretty good. So I hope to be able to show you the journey that God has had me on as He prepared me to meet Jesus. My journey is a little different than a lot of you in this recovery room, but Jesus meets all of us right where we are in the middle of our mess. If you can't identify with my situation, I hope you can identify with my unhealthy thinking and how I felt. I did not grow up in an alcoholic home. I did not grow up in a drug-addicted home. I did not grow up in a single-parent home. I did not grow up in a physically abusive home. And still, I earned my seat in these rooms just like you all did. We all have different histories, but we all need the same solution. Unfortunately, it takes some of us a long time to find the real solution. I had a list of solutions, but God wasn't even on my original list. I was on the wild ride of codependency, and it would have destroyed me if God hadn't stepped in and redirected my life. Now I'll give you some insight into my childhood, where the codependency all started. I have 2 older brothers and a younger sister. Wayne was 2 years older than me, and he is mentally handicapped and has epilepsy. And Nancy was 6 years younger than me, and she was mentally handicapped and had epilepsy. My codependency started as a 6-year-old when Nancy was born with health problems. I was a little girl who loved to play with dolls, and now I had a real-life baby to cuddle. And the problem was that scary things were happening because of her seizures, and I was too young to really understand what was going on with her. When I was 12, I rescued Nancy from a bunch of boys in the schoolyard of our elementary school. She was 6 years old. That was a terrifying experience for me. In my young mind, it looked to me as if no one was protecting Nancy, so I became her protector. I experienced the world as a cruel and scary place for mentally handicapped children. Nancy and I shared a bedroom until I was 17, and my young mind believed that she would die in a seizure if I didn't call for help in the middle of the night. After the war, my dad started a family business and spent 6 days a week totally involved in that. Mom was totally involved with Wayne and Nancy, and I was the quiet little girl lost in the middle with my own needs that weren't being met. What no one saw was that I was growing up feeling rejected, unloved, unwanted, and unimportant, and I was carrying the burden of Nancy that no one had ever asked me to carry. So now I'll tell you about the codependency in my elementary school experiences. I was a poor student, and I struggled year after year. In elementary school, I failed grade 5, and when I repeated the grade, I had the same teacher again. And one day she said to me, "But Wendy, we studied all this last year." My grades didn't improve my second year of grade 5, so I was faced with shame and guilt, and I felt inadequate, useless, worthless, and stupid. Sometimes the teacher would give back our test papers by handing them out from the highest mark to the lowest mark, and she might have been trying to praise the smart students, but she sure beat down those of us at the bottom. All 20-plus kids in the class now saw that I was last or second last. I was full of shame and guilt, and I felt that everybody saw me as the failure that I already believed I was. In elementary school, we always had to take part in sports. I wasn't good at any sports, and when teams were chosen, I was always left standing alone, and then someone had to take me. What I saw was that I was good for nothing and no one wanted me. I had the same problem in my brief seasons in Sunday school. I stopped going because it was just another place where I had to be able to remember and repeat things, and I couldn't do that. The other kids always seemed to know what was going on in the class, but I couldn't keep up, and now everyone in Sunday school knew that I was a failure and stupid. I did learn one thing, though. I learned that God loved the birds, the bees, the bugs, the worms, the whole wide world, and that's all good. But my question as a young girl was, then what's so wrong with me? Why did God create me so unlovable that even He couldn't love me? I buried that shame in me for years. I also believed that it was God's fault that Wayne and Nancy were the way they were, and it was His fault that I was the way I was. Our family was defective, and I blamed Him. I was ashamed of myself and my siblings and thought He could have put me in a different family. I can see now that my greatest strengths came from this family. At an early stage, I started looking for an escape from my thoughts and feelings, and this continued through my childhood and into my 30s. The escaping started with food when I was 6 years old, and I was smoking in grade 6. I watched my dad and his friends smoke and drink, and it seemed to relax them. My smoking and drinking had nothing to do with peer pressure. I was looking for something and I knew it. I smoked and drank in secret, and that was the beginning of my journey of looking to put something into my mouth so I could just sit down and go, just to exhale and relax, something to alter my thoughts and feelings, something to give me a sense of comfort and relief. Over the years, I used smoking, food, alcohol, and prescriptions as my solution. So this is a snapshot into my childhood, and I want you to know that I came from really good parents who provided very well for us, and we're just trying to meet the challenges of the complicated family that they had. I mean, I was a young girl who grew up on a horse farm. You know, every little girl's dream, but there was just this complicated family. Okay, now I will tell you about the trauma that drove the fears that ran my life. After many years in recovery and some counseling, I came to understand that the continuous medical crisis in the home caused me trauma. The bullying was trauma. My school experience, year after year after year, was trauma. A friend of the family was shot on the side of the road. My older cousin was stabbed to death by her boyfriend. A school friend shot himself. A 17-year-old family friend was raped and killed and found under a bridge. A friend died in a boating accident at the cottage. Years later, a recovery friend committed suicide. There's other tragic events like that, but that's enough to give you an example of the trauma that chased me until I was 45 years old. I had all this scary emotion going on inside of me, and no one ever talked about it. Nobody ever expressed any emotion. It happened, and then that was it. I didn't know how to deal with this, so I internalized all the fear and pain and confusion and found that I could bury it under a substance. As a result of the trauma, it's not surprising that by my mid-teens, I had some self-harm behaviors, and I had begun to contemplate suicide. I was always afraid of life and felt unprotected from this scary world. From then on, I filtered everything through the emotional survival skills I had developed as a result of the trauma in my life. My solution for everything was to bury it before you have to feel any pain. Now I'll tell you a little bit about my 12-step recovery life. I came into 12-step recovery rooms August 28th, 1979, when I was 29 years old, and I was desperate to find a solution for my first husband's alcoholism. I was exhausted, angry, and afraid because no matter how much I tried, I couldn't stop him from going to the bar every day and drinking away his paycheck. 2 beautiful little boys and a faithful, loving wife couldn't fix alcoholism. In Al-Anon, I went to a lot of meetings, I worked with a sponsor, and I finally had a community of people that understood what was going on in my life. They taught me about the family disease of alcoholism, and they were my lifeline. In Al-Anon, they taught me the 3 C's. I didn't cause it, I can't control it, and I can't cure it. This new information lifted a real burden off of me because I thought I wasn't being a good enough wife. I had taken ownership of his alcoholism, and it had nothing to do with me. I didn't know it, but he was drinking this way before we ever met, and his alcohol problem was way bigger than me. As I've already explained, I came out of my childhood with a very low opinion of myself, and then the breakup of our 9-year marriage caused me more guilt and shame because I had failed in life again, and now I was hurting my 2 little boys. Within the first 10 years of recovery, God lifted my mental obsession and physical addiction to cigarettes, alcohol, and prescriptions, and put me in a place of neutrality with them. It was then that the food addiction emerged at the monster that it was, and it took over my life, and I was a hopeless, helpless, chronic food addict. Food consumed my thoughts every day and every night. I was about 70 pounds overweight. I had several major health problems, and I binged all day. I was 45 years old, and all my attempts to control my weight and heal my body had failed, and I tried hard. I was emotionally, physically, and spiritually bankrupt, and I was totally beat by my food addiction. And one morning, there I was, sitting in a church, looking for the only thing that I had never tried before, God. I finally hit the bottom of that pit of guilt and shame about myself, and Jesus met me in the church that morning. I had spent my first 45 years running from God, and you know what happens when you run from God? You just get really, really tired. I finally just came to the end of myself, and I knew I was defeated. It was because of my food addiction that I accepted Christ. Once I had become a believer, I wondered why, when I went looking for help in 1979, that God didn't just pick me up and sent me down in the middle of a nice nice, warm, friendly church like Neighbor's Church. But no, he picked me up and set me down in the middle of a bunch of Al-Anons and alcoholics, feeling hopeless, helpless, and scared to death, and he left me there to grow for 15 years. Hindsight shows me that he already had a plan for my life. God used the non-believers to teach me that he loved me and that I had value. They talked about a higher power, and I was okay with that. And that's what makes it totally safe for other people like me running from God to walk into the recovery room doors. I slowly progressed from a higher power to a loving God, and then after 15 years in recovery to Jesus. It was because of their higher power that I eventually ended up at the foot of the cross. If God had been pushed on me, I would have been out the door because I was afraid of what he would do to me. And you know, it hurts my heart when I hear church people speak negatively about the non-Christian recovery groups and suggest that we can't get what we need there. I've had some Christians just dismiss it as having no value. These recovery people saved me from insanity and suicide and pointed me to God, and they set me up to meet Jesus. God knew I didn't trust him and that I was afraid of him, so he worked anonymously in the background of my life. I said earlier that God had a plan for me all those years in Al-Anon, and now I can see how he's unfolded this plan in my life. For years now, as a believer, the non-Christian recovery groups had been my mission field. When we started Celebrate Recovery in our previous church, God's call for me was to build a bridge between the Christian recovery groups and the non-Christian recovery groups. And I was able to do this because he had me firmly planted in both worlds. I was able to reach out to both groups, and I saw miracles happen as women freely crossed both ways over the spiritual bridge that God had given them. Now I'm going to tell you a little about the codependency in our life. Just to let you know, I already talked about my brother Wayne. Now I'm going to talk about my husband Wayne. Wayne has read my testimony, and when I talk about him, I'm not husband bashing or taking his inventory. I'm using our history as an example for my unhealthy behavior. The later years in my recovery have been about recognizing where my heart is behind closed doors. After 4 years as a single parent, Wayne came along. I hadn't been looking for a relationship, but suddenly there he was, and I said, okay, come on in. I'd been in Al-Anon for 7 or 8 years, and I thought I was self-sufficient, self-reliant, self-confident, self-aware, and I thought I had a self-created solid foundation for living my life peacefully. As a result of all my hard work, my previously unmanageable life was now manageable. I thought I had developed some healthy relationship skills, and all those new skills actually sounded really great in my head, but it was a whole different story when Wayne moved into the house and I had to apply them day after day after day with a real person. Some days it was exhausting, and a lot of the old codependent behavior, unfortunately, slowly came back. Wayne had an anger problem, and I had a people-pleasing problem, and we were both driven by the fear of rejection and abandonment from our childhoods and our first marriages. In my attempt to keep things calm in the home, I tried to control everyone and everything to keep the house running the way Wayne liked it. We're a blended family, so on weekends and holidays, there could be a lot of moving parts, which required that we be flexible. Wayne struggled a lot with being flexible, so he was upset a lot. I couldn't fix it, so I tiptoe around and tried to stay out of the way. We never yelled at each other. Our pattern was he would puff himself up with his angry position and his angry look, and then he'd just stomp around the house and sulk, and then he'd go to bed. I would retreat silently and sulk, and then I'd go on an eating binge into the night until I was so sick I fell into bed. It's pretty sad, but those were our coping skills. We were both immature and full of fear, and absolutely nothing was ever resolved. This made it very hard for us to trust each other, and once again, I felt like a failure as a wife in marriage number 2. His underlying anger would trigger my insecurities, and I would feel defective, unlovable, unwanted, unworthy, misunderstood, and rejected. And then my anger would kick in, and the little voice in my head would say, I'm going to make you pay. And I'd wait. And I haven't heard that voice now in over 20 years, so I'm thankful for that. But my payback was, I knew his fears, And when I saw that he was remorseful for whatever had gone on, I would reject him. And it's like, I knew where his little fear spot was, his little insecurity spot was. And I would touch that, knowing it would trigger his insecurities. And I did this even after I had been in recovery for a good number of years, and I knew better. I was being mean-spirited, but I thought that by doing this, I would show him that he had hurt me, and like then he'd never do it again. Well, that's why I said that I have to consider, what is my heart like behind closed doors? Eventually we went for counseling. For communication in our marriage was going to be our topic, we thought. At our first appointment, the professional gave us each our own counselor and told us to go to 12-step recovery meetings and get help there. We each needed to find individual healing for ourselves and stop trying to control and fix each other. God eventually took care of our 35-year marriage. We didn't have to fix it. Our biggest help came from having 12-step recovery sponsors who gave us practical, godly, 12-step recovery direction, not advice. They spoke truth to us, even though it was hard to hear, but that's their job. And if I have too much pride and fear to let them speak truth to me, then there's no hope for me. And I'm doomed to a life of anger, fear, rejection, loneliness, and self-pity. Because I was living in this fantasy place in my mind that if I just try hard enough, I could fix me and those around me, and then my life would be perfect. And everyone would be happy, and they'd think I was a great mom and a great wife. I was conditioned in my childhood to help and fix others, but as adults, no one seemed to want to cooperate with me, and no one seemed happy, so that didn't work as well as it did in my childhood. I've been working with my current sponsor for 22 years, and she's a believer. She walked me through the hard times in our marriage, and she told me about a good recovery tool, and it's a hula hoop. And so she said, and see how small this is? It's not one of the big ones. And she said, anything outside of this is none of my business. The hula hoop reminds me that no matter how much I love Wayne, I can't fix him, I can't change him, I can't control him. If he's hurting, I can't remove his pain. If he's angry, I can't fix his anger. I tried for years, but I couldn't make him happy. I thought if he's happy, then I can be happy. But now I just stay out of it. I'm not his solution. His healing is between him, his sponsor, and God. My job is to pray for him, love him, and offer him grace. For our first 10 years together, Wayne was a dry drunk with untreated depression. And it's like I was following him around with a box of Band-Aids. And every time he had a thought or a feeling or was judgmental or unforgiving or controlling, anything like that, it's like I was attempting to stick a Band-Aid on him. Hindsight showed me that he couldn't have any feeling that I didn't approve of because his moods caused fear in me. Those 10 years were hard, but when I finally got out of the way, God stepped in and I saw miracles happen. It was then that Wayne went for anger management and was treated for depression, and I had nothing to do with that. So I had to reluctantly admit to myself that I was powerless to change Wayne. His anger wasn't about me. I might have been the target, but I am not the problem. I just wanted an emotionally safe place to live, which isn't wrong. But the problem was that I was chasing after Wayne rather than God. Wayne's anger was driven by his internal fears, not by me. I had to stop appeasing Wayne in my attempt to have peace because I was getting in God's way. I came to understand that there's three kinds of business: Wayne's business, my business, and God's business. And I needed to learn the difference and then take responsibility for my business only. And keeping the focus off of Wayne and his business and on me and my business gave God space to work in our lives. In one of my conversations with my sponsor, she told me that Wayne has a God and it's not me. She told me that I wasn't qualified for the job. And I was just trying to help Wayne, but I was getting in God's way. And she says, I'm a small G God, Holy Ghost Jr. And I didn't like it when she said that. So now, I would like you 12-step recovery people to consider something, and I know you're all 12-step recovery people. When you look at all the work you've done over the years, just take a minute to consider, how hard it is for you to change yourself. It's really hard. Then you'll understand what little chance you have to change anyone else. That's God's job. One day, my counselor asked me how high the wall around me was, and I actually reached my hand out to touch it. I hadn't known the wall was there, so I was really surprised by my reaction. She explained that over the course of my life, I had a slow and steady accumulation of deep hurts and disappointments, and I had begun to build a wall of protection around myself. And any time I was hurt or afraid, I just added more bricks to my wall. And Wayne and I had a lot of trouble communicating through my brick wall. Now I'm going to tell you about a few minutes about my COVID years. When we were suddenly in lockdown, my life came to a standstill, and then God really had my attention. God revealed a whole new depth to my recovery, and what He has shown me is I am my problem. Turns out it's not Wayne, it's not my family, it's not my finances, it's not my church, it's not my friends, but I always blamed someone or something out there for my problems. God showed me that my problem, that I was unwilling to trust Him. I honestly thought I trusted Him, but He showed me the truth. He showed me, number one, that I trusted Him with the small things that I didn't feel threatened by. Number two, the things that I could possibly still manipulate and solve myself if I didn't like the way things were going. I couldn't stand the fear and the anxiety I felt when life became unpredictable. And as a result of all the trauma from my past, I was afraid to trust God's solution, and that was my problem. I thought, who in their right mind would trust a God that let this kind of thing happen in their life? And I thought, well, not me. But since then, God has healed and grown me a lot. And now, when something comes up in my life, rather than panic, my solution is to pause and ask myself these two questions. Question number one, do I believe that God is who He says He is? That's, do I believe that God is who He says He is? I have to decide, it's yes or no. God doesn't let me sit on the fence. Question number two, do I believe that either God is everything or God is nothing? He can't be both, because that's not God. So what's it going to be for me in this situation? I have to decide, because if I think I can still control the person or the situation, I won't give it to God. My final thought now is, though, I believe that God already knows what's going on in this situation, and He already knows the outcome. So I'm going to trust Him with it. And when I do that, then the fear and the panic calm down, and I have God's peace back again. So Wayne was my example for my unhealthy behavior in this talk, but I wasn't just focused on Wayne's life. I saw all the struggles that other people were having, and I was like a sponge, like going around and sucking up all their problems and jumping in to help solve them. They were not my problems to pick up and solve. But the internal fear from childhood would be triggered, and when things around me were chaotic and unpredictable, then I had to jump in and fix the problems quickly. I thought that God didn't care about us, so I always tried to have a plan. God is not the author of confusion, but I sure could be. I'd allow my feelings to muddle my thoughts and confuse the issues. I'd convince myself that I could fix a situation and rescue everyone from their poor choices, and it didn't always go well, because that's not my job. That's me trying to make myself feel important and needed by getting involved in someone else's drama. I spent a lot of time rehashing the drama in my life. It's also called whining. And one day, it was pointed out to me by a very wise person that me, Wendy, I was the constant person in all these things. That really hurt my feelings. I felt judged and misunderstood. As a result of all the pain and anger I carried inside, I was innocently in denial about my attempts to control other people's lives. Praise God, He put people in my life that had the courage to speak to me about my actions, rather than worrying about hurting my feelings. But that's what recovery is supposed to be about, speaking truth with love. Now I know that it's not the people around me that are the problem, it's me. Me and my codependent behavior was the common factor in everything. Something was wrong inside of me that I would accept dishonest and disrespectful behavior from other people. What was wrong inside of me that I would lash out at the kids that I'd die for? There was something broken inside of me. I had been groomed by my internal dialogue from childhood to accept unacceptable behavior, and I would compromise my values to please others. I was codependent in all areas and relationships. This was not about other people or events, and I had to stop pointing my finger out at them. Recovery gave me the tools to start looking at myself. Their behavior was absolutely not good, but I was using them to justify my unhealthy behavior, which stemmed from the abandonment and unpredictability in my childhood. Even after I'd forgiven the people who had harmed me, I was still being re-victimized by my thoughts and the feelings that they produced. After a time, the people were no longer a problem for me, and as a believer, I realized that it was Satan that drove my inner dialogue, and he spoke lies to me for years. Eventually, God showed me that I was wasting my energy trying to control everything around me in order to create like this false sense of peace for myself. He wanted to renew my mind, but I was afraid to let go of things. It turns out my life was so hard because I was trying to do God's job. My only solution was to stop trying to do God's job. I've learned now that I don't have to entertain every thought that pops into my head. And when Satan tries to take over my thoughts, I just say, no, you can't do that. You're speaking lies. And I have the God-given power and authority to shut that down. And I have a scripture for that. Luke 10:19 says, I have given you authority to trample on snakes and scorpions and to overcome all the power of the enemy. Nothing will harm you. Over a long period of time, I learned to have faith in God, one situation at a time. I can't stand here and say that I have enough faith for the rest of my life, but I have experienced that God gives me enough faith for today. I trust that tomorrow He'll provide the faith, courage, strength, and wisdom that He knows I'll need for the day. When I go to bed at night, I thank God for the day because God does not create bad days. But my obsessing, worrying, and controlling behavior can really spoil God's good day for me. You can probably tell by now that I thought all my problems were caused by other people doing things that I didn't approve of, and I'd get scared and then I'd get angry. The 12 steps led me to a solution for this. In the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, they talk about a kit of spiritual tools will be laid at our feet. My problem was that I always had mine plugged into the wrong power source. I had my spiritual tools plugged into my sponsor, my husband, the kids, my job, church friends, and recovery meetings, waiting for all of them to change so that I would feel loved, respected, appreciated, worthy, and needed. If I keep looking for others to fill me up, I'll be discouraged, disappointed, and frustrated every single day. The spiritual toolkit that God has given me now has power tools in it. Wayne's been a mechanic for 50 years, and he's got some pretty cool tools, like, in his big red toolbox. But nothing he has compares to what I have in my toolkit now. My new tools are God-powered tools. Now that my God-powered tools are plugged into the right power source, which is Jesus, I seldom fall into the codependent pit of despair now. If I'm going to survive in this chaotic world, I have to be plugged into Jesus. If I'm not plugged into Jesus, I'll be anxious, depressed, scared, frustrated, and angry. I'll be full of self-pity and living as a victim. I couldn't stop other people's bad behavior, so in my mind, I had to find a way to make unacceptable behavior acceptable. If they did something I didn't like, rather than dealing with the problem, I'd minimize it. Like say, he didn't really mean it, it didn't hurt that much. And then I'd rationalize it. Everybody does it, that's what men are like. He'll change, he's sorry. Or I'd compromise my values. I'd lower my standards just to get along and avoid conflict. I did this rather than confront a problem. I wanted God to change everyone else out there rather than transform me. My anxiety and depression were caused by me trying to control and fix everyone around me so that I would feel emotionally and physically safe. I have a lot of internal scars from beating myself up. But recovery has saved me emotionally, physically, and spiritually. And now when I look in the mirror and into my own eyes, I see God's daughter. Sometimes I'm in awe of how this God I didn't like or trust and certainly wasn't looking for lifted me up, and He got me from my past to my present. I'm 73 years old now, and God still has to redirect me sometimes. I'm going to now tell you about what I call my badges. As an adult, I learned from professionals that I was a victim. I'd get together with my new friends and we'd all shine our victim badges. Poor me, look how hard my life is. Then the professional community decided we were survivors, so now I had a shiny new survivor badge. Then I had a wife badge, a mom badge, followed by a single mom badge, a divorce badge, a remarried badge, and a stepmom badge. And one day my sponsor asked me to make a list of who I thought I was. And this is it. I'm a daughter, a sister, a cousin, a niece, a friend, a granddaughter, a wife, a mother, an aunt, a single mother, and a stepmother. But I had no idea who I was. Not a clue. All these badges, along with all the negative things that I've already told you that I believed about myself, they were my identity. After many years, Jesus has done a great work in healing all the hurts and fears in me. I've recovered the innocent child that he had originally created me to be, and I'm God's grown-up daughter now. I've had addictions and bad behavior, and he loves me. I've hurt my kids, and he loves me. I've abused my body, and he loves me. I've allowed others to abuse my body, and he loves me. I rejected and disrespected Wayne, and he loves me. God loves me because of who he is, not because of who I am. And he loves me whether I accept that love or not. I didn't know it, but Jesus was there all those years ago, loving me during the hard times in my life. If he hadn't been there, some situations would have been a whole lot worse than they were. He loved me then, and he still loves me now every day. Satan always spoke lies into my mind, but Jesus has replaced those old negative words with his words. He says, I am wanted, I am beautiful, I am forgiven, I am free, I am capable, I am respected, I am special, and most important, I am loved. Jesus has healed my heart and renewed my mind, and I feel loved. I haven't been reformed, I've been transformed by the grace of Jesus and a loving and forgiving Heavenly Father. That's the miracle that God did for me. About 25 years ago, God used the 12-step process to take me back through the past traumas, and this time Jesus walked me through all the experiences on an emotional level. Jesus has healed me, and most days I have freedom, and this chaotic world doesn't have to change for me to have peace. I know that the credit goes to God, the blame goes to Satan, and the responsibility goes to me. The battle is for my mind, and Satan's goal is for the destruction of my body, soul, and spirit. In closing, I would like to say that today I know exactly who I am, and I know exactly whose I am. I accepted Christ when I was 45 years old, and I was baptized at the Gathering Community Church in Ottawa in 2010 when I was 60 years old. When I was standing in the baptismal tank that Sunday, I could feel the presence of the Holy Spirit, and any lingering that God didn't love me was washed away that day. And as I was preparing this talk, I was reflecting back, and I realized that I believe that the final bits of guilt and shame that I had carried was washed away that day also. So I purposefully didn't introduce myself at the beginning of my talk because as I was telling my story, I would have been introducing you to the old me, and that is not my identity now. So now I would like to introduce you to the still imperfect recovering sinner that keeps showing up at church and meetings every week. My name is Wendy. I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ, who by his grace has recovered from food addiction, compulsive overeating, and controlling, fixing, obsessing behaviors. And my new badge says, I'm God's beloved daughter. So thank you for coming, and thank you very much for listening.